In Ukraine, a $500 drone is killing tanks, worth over $10 million. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is this. Most of these tanks weren't destroyed because the enemy was smarter. They were destroyed because of the same 7 mistakes repeated again and again. In February 2023, near Vuhledar, Russia launched the largest tank assault of the war. Within hours, over 100 tanks were burning or abandoned. Not because the tanks were bad, not because the technology failed, but because commanders ignored lessons that every modern army is supposed to know. And if you think this only applies to Russia, it does not. Even Western tanks, Leopards, Abrams, were not immune. Modern tanks are the most sophisticated armored vehicles ever built. Reactive armor, thermal sights, 120mm cannons capable of punching through steel at 3 kilometers. But technology doesn't matter if you're using it wrong. And in Ukraine, we're watching armies learn the hardest lessons in real time. So what are these 7 errors that keep turning modern armor into scrap metal? And more importantly, how do you avoid them? The first and deadliest mistake is thinking tanks operate alone. They don't. They can't. Early in the Ukraine conflict, Russian forces sent convoys of unprotected tanks straight into ambushes. In Bucha, no infantry, no air support, no artillery, no engineers clearing the terrain ahead. The Ukrainians destroyed them methodically, and this mistake alone has destroyed hundreds of tanks. According to military analysts Mark Kenshin and Peter Edmonds, a key part of effective tank warfare is using the vehicles in tandem with infantry, air support, artillery, and engineers, a tactic known as combined arms. This is in theory. It's doctrine that's been proven since World War II. Had the Russians practiced combined arms at Vuhledar, they might have sent infantry teams ahead of the tanks to clear terrain and scout attack points. Instead, they repeated the same mistake that cost them Bucha. That kind of cohesion requires training. Lots of it. Russian crews get most of their training on the job, which explains why coordination breaks down under fire. Ukrainian analysis of Russian armored formations around Soledar showed tactics focused on knowing or pushing through defenses rather than maneuvering with combined arms. When that failed, Russia switched to small assault groups of 3 to 15 soldiers, armed with small arms and light weapons, abandoning their tanks entirely because they could unuse them effectively. The lesson is brutal. A tank without infantry support is just an expensive target. Infantry clears buildings, protects flanks, and prevents ambushes. Artillery suppresses enemy positions before tanks advance. Air support provides reconnaissance and strikes hardened defenses. Engineers breach obstacles and clear mines. Remove any of these elements, and your tank becomes a coffin. But even with perfect combined arms, there's another mistake that's destroying more tanks than any weapon system. Modern tanks are heavily armored on the front, sides, and rear. The turret roof, that's a different story. And drones figured this out fast. While modern MBTs are extremely well armored on all sides, the unarmored turret roofs present a unique tactical opportunity that drones are perfectly poised to exploit. In 2024 and 2025, Ukraine's stock of advanced Western main battle tanks faced depletion due to Russian drone attacks targeting this exact vulnerability. Even American M1 Abrams tanks proved vulnerable to top-down attacks from FPV drones, just like Russian tanks throughout the war. This is why crews die even when the tank survives. A Ukrainian soldier from the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade put it simply, "The Russians are UNTD. They also understand our drones are hunting their tanks." This mutual threat has fundamentally altered tank tactics on both sides. Most of the anti-tank drones used early in the conflict were built from scratch. Using off-the-shelf parts from commercial sources, Ukraine developed a domestic drone manufacturing industry. Russia began producing Iranian drone designs domestically. These drones are highly precise weapons. Most anti-tank drones use first-person view technology, allowing skilled operators to deliver highly accurate attacks targeting specific components, engine grills, ammunition, storage, fuel tanks, and especially that unarmored turret roof. Some systems now incorporate artificial intelligence, targeting algorithms to identify targets in complex battlefield environments and facilitate autonomous flight through electronic jamming. The response has been improvisation. Both sides started welding plates and additional armor onto turrets. Turtle tanks that were initially mocked but are now standard. Ukrainian crews admitted they're doing the same thing because it works. Israel equipped its Merkava 4 tanks with cope cages, metal nets protecting the upper surface specifically to counter drone-dropped warheads. Active protection systems like Trophy and Iron Fist have been upgraded to intercept vertical attacks. With initial capability proven in testing, though, work continues to increase effectiveness. The upgraded Trophy and Iron Fist active protection systems demonstrated their capability to protect tanks from vertical attacks in 2024, using radar and electro-optical sensors combined with AI detection, achieving interception in microseconds. But active protection systems are expensive, complex, and not available on most tanks currently deployed, which means the drone threat remains the #1 killer of armored vehicles in modern warfare. So what's the next mistake commanders keep making? Tanks need to move, but moving predictably gets you killed. Russian forces learned this the hard way repeatedly. Intelligence analysts watching Russian operations noted that armored vehicles advanced slowly along predictable routes and were periodically destroyed by Ukraine's anti-tank units lying in wait. The Ukrainians built entire defensive strategies around this predictability. They identified likely avenues of approach, prepositioned anti-tank teams, and simply waited for Russian columns to drive into kill zones. The pattern repeated across multiple offensives. After Ukraine's counteroffensive stalled in 2023, Russians launched a new offensive toward, according to available data, more than 12 motorized infantry brigades with complementary tank regiments fought in the area for over 2 months with only partial success despite overwhelming numbers. Why? The Ukrainian forces knew where they were coming from. They'd studied the terrain, identified choke points, and prepared defenses accordingly. This single error turns armor into a liability. The mistake isn't moving, it's moving the same way every time. If your convoy leaves the base every Tuesday at 0600, the enemy notices. If your tanks always take the main roads, ambushes wait there. If you park in the same defensive positions repeatedly, artillery has your coordinates. Successful tank operations require unpredictability. Vary your routes. Change your timing. Use deception-fake movements in one direction while your actual force maneuvers elsewhere. Reconnaissance is critical here. Before tanks move, scouts need to identify enemy positions, obstacles, and potential ambush sites. Real-time intelligence from drones, satellites, or forward observers should guide movement decisions dynamically. Not according to a pre-planned schedule, the enemy can predict. Ukraine's successful Kursk offensive in August 2024 demonstrated this principle. Tanks and heavy armor generated initial success by using forward reconnaissance before committing to routes, allowing them to avoid prepared Russian defenses and strike where unexpected. But predictability isn't just about movement patterns. It's also about how you position your vehicles on the battlefield. Tanks are not invincible. Terrain determines whether they're mobile firepower platforms or stationary targets waiting for destruction. The Ukrainian Rasputitsa mud season significantly hinders the cross-terrain capabilities of tanks, slowing progress to a crawl and making them vulnerable to artillery and drone strikes. Russian armored formations repeatedly got bogged down in mud, unable to maneuver, presenting easy targets. But terrain isn't just about mud. It's about understanding what ground favors offense and what ground favors defense. Open plains, tanks excel there. Long sight lines, mobility, the ability to maneuver and engage at range. Urban environments, Tanks become vulnerable, restricted movement, limited visibility, infantry within a tank, weapons hiding in buildings above your sight line. Forested areas provide concealment but restrict maneuverability and create ambush opportunities. Rivers and bridges create natural choke points where defenders concentrate fire. The lesson from Ukraine is clear. Deploy tanks where terrain supports their strength. When Ukrainian forces attempted their 2023 counteroffensive, they fielded approximately 470 tanks and up to 1,410 armored fighting vehicles along the Orikhiv-Tokmak-Melitopol axis. Despite this massive force, the offensive stalled because Russian defenses were positioned on terrain that favored defense-layered minefields, pre-sighted artillery zones, prepared positions on high ground overlooking Ukrainian avenues of approach. Ukrainian brigades were undertrained at the start of the offensive, which accounts for a significant proportion of tactical mistakes made during execution, including poor terrain analysis that led forces into prepared kill zones. Proper positioning also means understanding fields of fire. Your tank's cannon is useless if terrain blocks your shot. Position on high ground when possible for observation and engagement range. Use defiles, low ground, to move unseen, but never stay there under fire. Hold down positions where only the turret is exposed over a ridge. Maximize protection while maintaining firepower. These are basic principles. But under combat stress, exhausted crews forget them. And that brings us to another critical mistake. Technology doesn't win tank battles. Trained crews win tank battles. A study comparing Russian and Ukrainian forces found that inadequately trained infantry resulted in a lack of essential support measures for Russian tanks. Without proper infantry training, combined arms coordination falls apart. But it's not just infantry. Tank crews themselves need hundreds of hours of training to operate effectively under combat conditions. Western tank crews train extensively on gunnery, maneuver, maintenance, and communication. They only fire, exercises, simulations, and combined arms drills until procedures become automatic. Russian crews, by contrast, receive most training on the job, meaning their first real experience coordinating with infantry often happens under fire. The results speak for themselves. Ukraine reported destroying over 3,000 Russian tanks through the conflict, with many losses attributed to poor tactics resulting from insufficient training. And this is why crews die even when the tank survives. Crew readiness isn't just about knowing how to drive and shoot. It's about maintaining situational awareness in the chaos of combat, communicating effectively with supporting elements, performing emergency repairs under fire, and making split-second tactical decisions when separated from command. It's about knowing your vehicle's capabilities and limitations, intimately maximum engagement range, reload times, fuel consumption, vulnerable points. The difference between a trained crew and an untrained one is survival. Trained crews spot threats faster, engage accurately on the first shot, maneuver effectively under fire, and recover from equipment failures. Untrained crews freeze, miss targets, crash into obstacles, and get killed. This is why Western forces refused to send tanks to Ukraine initially, not because the tanks themselves were ineffective, but because operating them requires training measured in months, not weeks. When Western tanks finally arrived, Leopard's challengers, Abrams Ukraine, used them sparingly, deploying only as part of specific breakthrough forces with highly trained crews. Despite this caution, Ukraine still lost some Western tanks, though crews usually survived due to better crew protection systems built into modern NATO designs. But there's one mistake that's even more fundamental than training. Tanks don't run on willpower. They run on fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and constant maintenance. And when any of those break down, your tank becomes a very expensive paperweight. Early in the Ukraine war, Russian forces suffered catastrophic logistical failures. Tanks ran out of fuel, broke down from lack of maintenance, and were abandoned by crews who couldn't repair them. Poor strategy and exacerbated logistical issues contributed to high Russian tank losses, leaving armor stranded and vulnerable. A tank battalion requires an enormous logistics tail. Each M1 Abrams consumes about 3 gallons of fuel per mile. A single tank company needs fuel trucks, ammunition, transporters, recovery vehicles, maintenance teams, and spare parts constantly. Modern tanks are complex machines. Track systems wear out, engines overheat, electrical systems fail. Without mechanics who can perform field repairs, minor problems become mission kills. The Russian military struggled with this throughout the conflict because their logistics system was never designed for sustained high-intensity combat far from established bases. Western militaries learned these lessons decades ago and built logistics doctrines around them. Forward logistics bases, preposition, fuel, and ammunition. Mobile maintenance teams accompany combat units. Recovery vehicles retrieve damaged tanks for repair rather than abandonment. But even with perfect logistics, tank units need time to refit, rearm, and conduct preventive maintenance. Commanders who push their vehicles beyond mechanical limits lose tanks not to enemy fire but to breakdowns. Ukraine's 2023 offensive saw significant equipment arrive late, leaving Ukrainian brigades under-trained on the equipment that did arrive and unable to conduct proper pre-combat maintenance checks. This contributed to mechanical failures during critical phases of the offensive. In modern warfare, logistics determines who can sustain combat operations and who exhausts their resources first. Russia's ability to continue the war depends heavily on its domestic tank production and ability to reactivate older vehicles from storage, currently estimated at producing or refurbishing tanks at a rate sufficient to sustain operations despite losses. Ukraine relies on Western donations and must carefully manage each vehicle's operational lifespan. But there's one final mistake that ties all these others together. The biggest mistake is assuming what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. Battlefield conditions evolve constantly, and rigid tactics get you killed. When Ukraine launched its 2022 counteroffensive, anti-tank weapons like Javelin and NLAW proved devastatingly effective, leading many analysts to proclaim the end of the tank era. But as the battle moved from northern suburbs to eastern plains, tanks proved essential, again just employed differently. The lesson isn't that tanks are obsolete. It's that tank employment must adapt to conditions. In 2023, both nations depleted their modern tank stocks and started reactivating older vehicles while Ukraine received Western tanks. By 2024, Ukraine made breakthroughs with drone jamming technologies, temporarily alleviating the drone threat and allowing more aggressive tank operations. This resulted in fiber-optic cable-guided drones that couldn't be jammed, creating a new tactical challenge. Back and forth, measure and countermeasure, tanks remain effective when deployed as part of well-integrated combined arms offensives, offering mobile firepower, operational flexibility, and shock effect. The doctrinal shift lies in embedding tanks into well-thought military formations rather than deploying them haphazardly. Such formations should comprise infantry support, electronic warfare units to counter enemy drones and reconnaissance, friendly drone units for real-time intelligence and attacking enemy assets, and proper logistics backhaul coordinated to deliver decisive tactical outcomes. Lessons learned from the Russo-Ukrainian War are being implemented into future tank designs. Active protection systems are becoming standard. Electronic warfare suites to counter drones are being integrated. Designs are incorporating better top protection against aerial threats. But technology alone doesn't guarantee success. The Ukrainian and Russian experiences prove that adaptation, learning from mistakes, adjusting tactics, innovating solutions matters more than raw capability. Armies that learn survive. Armies that repeat mistakes don't. So where does this leave modern tank warfare? Modern tanks aren't going anywhere. They're still the most powerful ground combat vehicles ever built. But the rules have changed, and commanders who don't adjust are sending their crews to die. The 7 mistakes we've covered operating without combined arms? ignoring drone threats, predictable patterns, poor terrain analysis, inadequate training, logistics failures, and refusal to adapt account for the vast majority of tank losses in Ukraine. Each one is avoidable. Each one requires discipline, training, and constant attention. The U.S. Army is already implementing these lessons. They're reintegrating Iron Fist active protection systems onto Bradley fighting vehicles at a cost of $191 million, with trophy systems being added to M1 Abrams tanks through partnerships with Leonardo DRS. European forces are following suit. Germany's new Leopard to A8 comes with Trophy as baseline equipment. The UK's Challenger 3 will receive Trophy by 2027. And the Netherlands has equipped their CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles with Iron Fist through a modernization program. Israel, having fought Hamas and Hezbollah with extensive drone warfare, upgraded both Trophy and Iron Fist to intercept vertical attacks, proving the threat can be countered with proper technology and tactics. But technology is only half the solution. The other half is doctrine. Training crews properly, coordinating combined arms, analyzing terrain before commitment, planning logistics sustainably, and most critically, learning from every engagement and adapting faster than your enemy. The mistakes outlined here aren't theoretical. They re-documented failures from ongoing combat operations where the price of error is measured in destroyed vehicles and dead crews. Study them. Learn them. Avoid them. Because in modern warfare, tanks still dominate the battlefield, but only when employed correctly. Make these 7 mistakes, and your multi-million-dollar armored vehicle becomes just another smoking wreck on the Ukrainian steppe. A cautionary tale for the next generation of tankers who hopefully learned what you didn't. The choice is simple: adapt or die. And on today's battlefield, there's no middle ground.